This is the Audience Connection podcast, where we hear from the best content strategists and storytellers in the industry about how to create content that builds audience connection. I'm your host, Lydia Chan. We are sponsored by Casual, the video partner for global businesses. With offices in the US, EMEA, and APAC, Casual lives and breathes storytelling, creating impactful stories on a global scale with a local touch. Welcome back to the Audience Connection podcast. Today's episode is all about storytelling in the age of emerging technology and how to make the complex feel human. My guest is Marcus Jones. He's a product storyteller and AI expert, but also a filmmaker, a former adjunct professor at NYU Tisch, and a creative leader who's worked in tech publications like Wired, helping companies like AWS and IBM turn advanced technologies into stories that resonate. If you're a storyteller in tech or spend a lot of your time explaining complex subject matters, you can relate to Marcus's viewpoint on being a translator and how that's helped him breathe in storytelling principles that work in the tech space. Marcus is also an early adopter of generative AI, so we unpacked what it actually means for creatives, when to use it, how to use it, and where it still falls short. This episode is full of practical insight and inspiration, so let's dive right in. Marcus, welcome to the show. Today, we're going to focus on storytelling that is specifically in the tech space, right? But first, I would love to just dive a little bit into your background for our listeners.
Okay. Well, Lydia, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the show that you've put together and the concepts that you're covering. My background comes from filmmaking. I'm an alum of New York University's film school. I actually taught advanced cinematography there for a few years. And the way that I approach storytelling is deeply rooted in that education. Um, Audiences first. We make films, we make shows, we make videos and commercials for an audience. That audience can be described in a way. They are a segment. And understanding what would be of value to them is the first thing that I look at whenever I'm approaching a new story.
Perfect. And yeah, I would love to kind of hear a little bit more about the principles from your time behind the camera, right? And the principles that still really you carry with you in your approach to storytelling and content creation today, especially in the technology space that you work in.
Well, the first principle coming back to is audience. I think that establishing that up front is going to make you the most effective storyteller. Um, the next thing is understanding if we're talking about video here, it's a temporal format. It has a beginning, middle, and end. It has a flow. It has a tone. Um, so establishing what that will be is something that will help you level up the story that you tell. I've found it to be particularly effective to embed stories about AI within greater stories about sports. A number of the better programs that I've put together for AWS were about their partnerships with the NFL or with the PGA or with Bundesliga, a German football league, soccer for us. Um, and in each of those stories, we were highlighting how those leagues are using technology either to reach fans, to enhance the sporting experience, to broaden the market reach. And the core functionality of each of these AI systems was woven into a much greater, exciting story about those particular sports.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess what else, right? And I think audience is extremely important, which is why I think for us at Casual, we always start with the audience, right? Who are we trying to speak to and why do they care about what you're saying? And let's find that nugget to base your storytelling around, right? But what other aspects of storytelling do you feel, brands should still hold really true in the way that they're approaching the work that they're creating?
Story stakes and characters. First is story stakes, probably the most useful tool in a storyteller's toolkit. Stakes are why characters do what they do, what's important to them, what motivates them, and for the audience, why they need to watch the story in the first place. If it's clear what's at stake for those characters, then you understand their motivations. You understand why they must do what they must do and what will happen if they don't. So, if you want to think about this from a business perspective or a technology perspective, whenever you're trying to establish a use case, there needs to be a reason for that use case to be put into place. And those reasons are, in effect, what the stakes are. The next thing is your characters, who you choose to be in the film. You may not always have control over that if this is a commercial or a corporate video or something like this. But ultimately, if you can have more compelling people in your film who can be more entertaining, more personable, or bring something new, then you're also going to create a great piece of content that's going to be a lot stronger. Taking all this into account, of course, other basics like remembering this is a temporal format, you're going to have to decide what information is going to be included and in what particular order, taking into account perhaps how your audience might be viewing this. Do you need to front load the story with the most pertinent information, or could that wait for a payoff at the end? And finally, it's just important that you think of whatever piece of content you're creating as something that's got to be entertaining. It's got to be worthwhile watching.
Yeah, for sure. And I think sometimes people don't think about all those different elements up front, right? In the way that they even put their brief together. And I think it's super important to just have that top of mind, right? So that, for those who are the creators or the creatives and the directors, they kind of have that solid brief from the marketers to really then bring the story to life. So Marcus, when we worked together, we did a lot of work for, like top consulting firms, right? Financial institutions. And now you find yourself creating content in the tech space, right? So, you said before that you see your role as part translator, part storyteller. Can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by that, about being a translator in this space?
Technology can mean anything. It could be something as simple as your utensils, your forks, your spoons, something that you grab it, you get it right away. Or it could be something as complex as large language models and transformer technology. Depending on what you're trying to explain, you've got to figure out what elements of that explanation are most relevant to who you're speaking to. So the first thing that I do whenever I'm approaching a story is I try to figure out, okay, for the audience that we're speaking to, whether that be business decision makers or IT decision makers in most cases, what do they need to understand? What type of context do they need, if any, um, to get to be involve themselves in the story that we're trying to tell? When it comes to technologies like AI or machine learning or cybersecurity, which are all core passion points of wired audiences, there are a whole range of levels in which we can enter that story, and there's a range of depths that we can take the story to. So my job is to figure out what we do need to unearth for a specific audience, so that we can speak to them at their level, so that they can see what the value of listening to the story would be, or what the value of understanding the technology could be.
Yeah, it's hard, right? Because, turning complex or technical ideas into something that's easily understandable is actually really difficult, right? And you have to look at who your audience is, like you said before. Is it a technical viewer or a non-technical viewer, right? And or I guess in your experience, are you seeing brands trying to speak to both in one piece, or is there a world where we can segment, hey, here's the piece of content that's focused on the more technical viewer, and here's the piece of content that's focused on the more non-technical viewers?
Well, when we're talking about branded content, especially in the B2B space, we have to have an appreciation for people's time and interest. While there are many who do consume whatever content we create passively, perhaps just out of interest, more often than not, people are listening with purpose in mind. So for that reason, it's important to be highly targeted. If you're targeting a business decision maker audience, they're going to be looking for what is the business value in this. So it doesn't necessarily help to begin or spend too much time with the technical intricacies or perhaps the technical value proposition if you don't make it clear what the business value proposition is. And you ask yourself, okay, if I only have so much time with this audience member, what do they need to know to be affected by the message? Does a business decision maker need to know how every element of this technology works? Alternatively, if you're speaking to a technical audience, they're going to find some of that higher level business value prop information just fluff or empty. They're going to be looking for things that are immediately applicable or even actionable to them. In that case, you may want to go into the weeds at a certain level, and that again, it depends on who those IT decision makers are, what their domain is, what are their, what is the scope of their work. So, I think that it's important whenever you're discovering what your story might be, and whenever you're pulling things together, to be as specific as possible when defining who your audience is.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting too. When you talk about who the commissioner is as well, like who's the kind of project manager that you're working alongside, and you find that it's that translator bit, right? That hat you have to put on, because if you're working with a marketer, they understand more the sort of the kind of human benefits, right, of the technology, and they know that that's what you're trying to convey. But when you're working with, say, the like a product manager, and in a lot of cases we are, right, we're like speaking directly with those who are really involved with the tech, and they just throw in so much of the technical stuff in there. So you kind of need to have that conversation around, hey, what's gonna work, what's not gonna work, and why, and almost be an educator, right?
In my practice, I often have the opportunity to speak to both. I speak to the marketing team, I speak to the subject matter experts, I speak to everybody in product. And indeed, they do approach explaining the same technology from the respective levels that you would expect from each of them. It it all depends on what the objective is of the piece of content that we're trying to create. Um, I find it useful to understand as much as I can. Quite often, there's a middle ground that emerges when I have a full spectrum understanding of what the story might be. The product teams um, often are able to surface uh, elements of whatever that product or service is that the marketers have missed. Perhaps it was an understanding issue. Perhaps it's something, a new feature or capability that's evolved even since the project has begun. Um, on the flip side of that, marketers sometimes have a much clearer uh, point of view of what is important because they're looking at it from a marketing strategy. So taking the time to understand the objectives of whatever the piece of content that you're creating, even understanding what their KPIs are going to be for the piece of content that you're creating, makes it a lot easier to figure out where that story should be anchored.
Yeah. And what is your approach in, figuring out how to, I guess, still tell like the human elements of these stories, right? Like, what's the approach to figuring that out or finding that information?
That's a good one. And I appreciate that you're raising the question of what is the human element. In the end, that's lost far too often. If you want to have a great story, you need to drill down to what the human element is. When you're telling technical stories, more often than not, you don't get there, but you want to get as close to that as possible. And here's how: we are all people, and we are all in a struggle to create something, whether that be bringing something new to market, whether it be solving a particular problem. And once you focus the story on what's most important to that particular audience member or that particular target, you are telling a human story to them because you're helping them with something. So if you want to look at it, let's say from the perspective of a developer, the role of the developer um, ranges from somebody who is writing code, somebody who is overseeing product, somebody in this case now is using technologies like Windsurf or Cursor, or other AI assistants to write code. Nonetheless, they are not only trying to create something that is new, that's exciting, that has value, but they're doing a lot of problem solving. So if you've got, for example, uh, a story that you want to tell to developers that's going to make it easier for them to do that job well, so that they can either focus on something that they find to be more rewarding, or to focus on something that was otherwise being somewhat neglected, or maybe just to get more of the same done. But once you're able to provide them with solutions to whatever they're going through in their particular role with the particular task at hand, you are telling a human story.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think sometimes people confuse a little bit of what the human story means, right? I think, there's a lot of focus on maybe a really big emotive piece, or it really focuses on, say, like a day in the life, or, just that that's something that's like really obvious that it's a human story. But human stories can be like anything, like you just mentioned, right? It's anything that someone can have a emotional connection with, right? And that emotion can be, again, like you said earlier, it could be humor, it could be like relief, it could be, just like a bit of joy, less stress, right? Like all these things are human connections that we can draw on. That's not necessarily, hey, this story made me cry, or, it made me like connect with someone in a different way. So I think, yeah, I think that's something that people need to learn about, what we mean by creating emotive stories. We, as in, storytellers.
Indeed, and there are opportunities to connect in a more classical sense to a human story. A lot of these technologies do have elements to them that can be applied to medicine, that can be applied to other elements of our personal lives, and our personal ambitions. And sometimes there is room for that. Um, if we're talking about video, we have the opportunity to create montages where we can just have a clip or two or sequence that addresses how a technology will affect people at that level. Um, but it always comes back to who you're speaking to, recognizing that you have so much time to spend with them, and signaling to them early on that you are going to provide them in this precious time with something of value to them, and you're not going to waste it. So figuring out what is the right balance of what type of human storytelling to include is part of the function of the storyteller.
Yeah, for sure. And Marcus, you've overseen a ton of high profile campaigns, right? Um, from Dodge, AWS, IBM, and not to mention a specific kind of client or particular project, but what have you seen as like maybe typical challenges, or you know yeah, I guess like a pattern of challenges, right, that you face with brands when they're trying to um, create campaigns around, trying to tell a story of a particular technology or a particular tech product.
I'd say that the most common mistake that tech companies make when they're uh, going to market is taking the approach of being features first. I can't tell you how difficult it is to understand why I care about a feature. That's the first thing that I need to know. I need to understand, what is it about this product that you're bringing to market that's going to help me? What does it solve? How do I even know that you understand what my needs are? So if you can address that, if you can build that context around your product, if you can show the use case and be use case first, you're going to have a much better success rate at connecting with people. Um, so whenever I'm I'm engaging with the client, of course I want to understand what those features are because of course they're going to be addressed indirectly or directly within whatever the piece of content is. But I make it a point to tease out what is the use case? How can I better understand this product through a demonstration? And once I get there and once I understand the pain points that it solves, it's much easier to start to explore what are the innovations in whatever feature set is being rolled out.
So I know you're super big on AI. You're an early adopter. So AI is really prevalent now in content creation, right? With tools like generative AI now entering, creative workflows, where have you found it most useful, right? And I'll layer on another question of, how do you maintain authentic storytelling with the proliferation of AI tools? Because I think that's what a lot of us storytellers are concerned about. But maybe when, as practice, once you start using AI tools, you actually maybe see that the authentic storytelling is still there.
Most of the time when people talk about AI today, we're referring to generative AI because that's what caught the world by storm in 2022. That's what has been viewed as the biggest threat to the way things have always been done and the greatest opportunity to do things differently. Um, but AI encompasses much more than that, including, for example, machine learning. Machine learning is reliable, it's explainable, but it isn't used for the same purposes that generative AI is. Machine learning would be more applicable, and let's say audio recording. That's how noise reduction works these days, or in quality control, in looking for flaws within a given video piece, or cutting a person out from a background, or some of these elements that are in the production process, tools that are part of the storyteller or the video storyteller's wheelhouse, but not necessarily about story. So I think for this conversation, we'll just focus on generative AI and how that applies to storytelling in the narrative sense. I appreciate that you kept saying AI tools. Most people skip the tool part, but that's actually how I look at AI. It is a tool. What is the purpose of going to a department store and buying a bunch of tools and just leaving them around? They end up just taking up space. They don't do anything. We don't go out and just buy tools. Nobody does that. What we do is we go about our lives, we go about our business, solving problems and building new things and realizing I could do this a lot better if I had a drill or a hammer. And that's the way people should look at AI. We all have a business function. We all have challenges, we have bottlenecks, we have opportunities that we may or may not be able to access. And when thinking about AI, you should think about how could I achieve any of these things better if I had a specific tool to do so? And then what would that tool look like? So, as a storyteller, I understand what I want to say. I understand how I'm going to say it. But what can be uh, work for me, what can be drudgery for me sometimes, is the mechanics of putting that together in different formats. The actual writing aspect of it doesn't need to be as difficult as it needed to be. Of course, I'm going to write my story. Of course, I'm going to articulate how it begins, how it ends, what the messages are, who are the speakers, how it flows, what the theme is, what the tone is. Do I have to do my spell check? Do I have to make sure that everything, flows grammatically? If I'm stumbling on a particular word, do I have to go to a dictionary? What is a thesaurus anyway? And who uses those anymore? Do I have to know everything up front when I first begin to write? Or can I leave gaps? Can I tell AI, uh, fill in what I'm trying to say when I mean the marble looking object? Is there a way that I can be more efficient in some of the work of writing so that I can be more effective in the art of storytelling? That's the way that I see AI.
Yeah. I like what you said about you still know what the objective is, right? to a certain extent, know how the story begins and ends. And you're the one directing to AI, right? Like to sort of tell you how to expand on certain things. And I think some of that thinking is lost with maybe folks who just think, hey, AI can do it all, right? And to say, and it's all in the prompting, right? To say like, hey, AI, write me a video for this product video. But that's not how you should approach it, right? You need to as approach it as a storyteller, because if you don't approach it as a storyteller, what comes out on the other side is not going to reflect, that, right? It's not going to reflect as good of a story as if it came from an actual storyteller to prompts.
Well, I would say by definition of the technology, if you were to ask AI to write your story for you, it's going to write the most probable story, which means it's going to write the most average story, the most likely story. And nobody wants to hear that. We don't go to the cinema. Well, we don't go to the cinema. We don't watch anything looking for the most probable next part of the plot. We don't want to hear about the most probable character. We want to be surprised. We want to be enchanted. We want to be delighted. We want to hear about something that we haven't heard about before. That's not something that AI does, at least very well. So you as a storyteller and your value of a storyteller as a storyteller is not diminished unless you're an average storyteller. And in that case, if you're an average anything, yes, AI is a threat to you. If what you write is as good as what ChatGPT would have written anyway, well, maybe you're going to want to figure out do a little reflection. I don't know. But these are valuable tools. They enable a person to achieve more if they know how to use them right. And the key to using any AI tool well is to understand what its purpose is and use it in line with that purpose.
Yeah, 100%. So is there any, I guess, as a lot of our listeners, they are filmmakers, creative ops, marketers. Where have you found AI tools to be the most helpful in the process of content creation?
What I appreciate most about that question is how difficult it is for me to answer it. AI is the first tool uh, that I've ever used where I'm always discovering new ways to use it. And I'm also always discovering new ways it can fail. So while I would like to say, this is it, use AI here, it's great, I can't say that. I can't rely on AI honestly for anything yet. Now this everything is about the capability of the user, and I don't want to say that better results couldn't be achieved by a better user. Uh, but in the end, um, I look at AI as my assistant, uh, or the most knowledgeable person in the room besides myself at what I'm trying to do. Of course, AI is more knowledgeable than all of us if we want to ask a bigger question. But as far as what the task is at hand, that's something that I'm piloting. And sometimes I find it to be particularly useful for AI to help me with, as I was saying, some of the finer elements of writing, whether it be a grammatical thing, maybe it's a structural thing, maybe it's a clarity thing. Um, I could never say, well, you know what? I can rely on the way AI structures things because, as we've probably all witnessed by now, it tends to structure things around the same way. And we can look at materials that are shared with us by our colleagues or put out there in the public space that were structured by AI. And we're like, oh, there goes that ChatGPT bolding again. Um, what I will say is that if you need to see what some options are, variations on a theme, other ways to state something or to look at something, or if you want to look around corners, it is pretty good with that. Sometimes I'll write uh, an entire output of any kind, whether that be just a comment or a full white paper, and I'll ask it, how else would you state this? And I might get feedback that is unexpected, that helps me look at things in a way that I haven't looked at before. I found AI to be useful when I need to put myself in the shoes of someone else or to look at something through somebody else's set of priorities. That's a thing that I would say do with caution. If I were to say, for example, right now, um, I'm going to be interviewed for a podcast by Lydia Chan, tell me what her priorities are. Well, it'll tell me something. It may have nothing to do with what your priorities are. But somewhere in there, there might be a nugget that says, oh, I understand. Lydia Chan is creating this for the purposes of XYZ. Maybe I could offer her a better conversation if I talked about a few different things. It can be
Yeah.
useful for that. But I always fall back to look at your AI or look at your use of AI uh, as an assistant and don't lose sight of your responsibility to make the final call on things.
Yeah. I really like that answer, Marcus, because I get that question a lot, right? With various industry peers, like, oh, how are you guys using AI? What part of the process are you using it in? Exactly what I asked you, and you have the right answer, right? It's not exactly pinpointing, hey, use it here, use it, like directive, use it here, use it here, use it here. You kind of almost need it as just like attached to you, right? It's part of you. It's an assistant, as you say, and you sort of bring it along throughout the whole process, right? Because there's elements throughout the whole process where you can ask it a question or you can refine, you can do some brainstorming, right? And that, like you said, that can be anywhere from the creative phase to the post phase to writing a blog, whatever it is. So I really like that input. So Marcus, to wrap things up, we just talked about AI, and I guess I would love to hear maybe some of your future predictions, if you have any, right? Like on where you see um, storytelling going with the proliferation of people adopting and utilizing these AI tools. What excites you? What worries you?
I'm excited for new formats, new ways of telling stories. Um, and when I say that, think of how classic cinema uh, and television shows are fundamentally two different ways of telling stories, or YouTube and YouTube Shorts, or Instagram, or Vine, or TikTok are all fundamentally different ways of communicating with each other. I think that AI is going to bring forward a new way of storytelling that's going to catch on. It has, of course, already brought forward many new forms of storytelling, but I wouldn't say that there is one that we could say right now, oh, yeah, I'm really in the mood for this type of AI storytelling. I don't think we've, as a society, sort of coalesced around something so singular, but one day we will. Um, I think storytellers is where I'd like to make my prediction. I would say that storytellers who are testing and learning, that are finding how they can leverage AI for their own individual needs, are going to find themselves much better off than those who are not. So I would encourage anyone, no matter what field you're in, to ask yourselves, could AI help me with this? Or could AI offer any kind of value at this particular moment? Um, because the results can be surprising. And to be unaware of how you might be able to level up what you do with AI uh, opens the door for somebody else who has discovered that before you and may end up taking an opportunity that you thought was going to be yours.
Perfect. Well, we'll end there. Marcus, thank you so much for joining the show. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you, Lydia. Appreciate you having me here.
Thanks for tuning in to the Audience Connection podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. If you'd like to connect with me about how I can help you tell better stories and connect better with your audiences, drop me a note, lydia@casualfilms.com. We'll be back with more episodes soon. See you next time.